Welcome to this meeting, Aid Strikes to Palestine, How Do We Build Fighting Trade Unions? We've got Jess, Walsh speaking, trade union organiser for the SWP and also in the elected leadership of the SWP. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jordan Rivera. I'm a member of the SWP in Hackney. I work at Homerton Hospital. I'm a health worker and activist for the NHS, a Unison member on Unison's NEC. And I've been involved in organising several protests for Palestine at my hospital and building a group of people there who want to be involved with campaigning for Gaza.
Okay, so how do we build fighting unions? I think it's useful for us to get together at this point because there's obviously we're in a new situation now in the last few days following the general election. We're facing, for the first time, as socialists, building in our unions, a Labour government. This is the first time in a long time. And so what does this mean? How are we going to organise, to get the kind of fights we need? Obviously, we're facing Keir Starmer, who I think that, none of us have much hope or, it's not the great hope coming over the hill for us. But I think, we've had a lot of discussions about this over the weekend already. Labour Party coming in a big majority in Parliament, but actually with very shallow support. Very shallow vote. There's actually, much more, I think John Curtis and other people have said that this is much more a vote against the Tories than it was really a vote with any enthusiasm for Labour. And of course, we'll talk about, the amazing results for the kind of left challenges towards Labour that we saw, the independents, whatever. So they're very much a vote against Labour, and it's not difficult to see why. I was, preparing for this meeting, I've listened to the Guardian did these in-depth podcasts where they basically came to the conclusion that Britain is broken. That's becoming much more of a mainstream kind of idea. Very much because of the deliberate austerity that's been pushed in British society for 14 years, and that's very much more that it's very much the consensus. From the media, from political commentators and everything. And I think it's worth thinking through this because I think it's something that should, make us very angry. I think, and because it's about what the kind of terrain that we're operating on when we're looking about fighting now. If we think about the kind of breadth and depth of cuts and how extensive it actually was. It's basically that every corner of the public realm was slashed in the austerity period. Councils losing 60p in every pound from 2010 to 2020. Libraries, swimming pools shutting down, playgrounds, youth services, social care, which actually left many kind of public spheres in Britain kind of completely hollowed out in lots of ways, with no kind of attempt at kind of creating any social cohesion. There's deliberate policy of starving funds to much needed services, and nothing has been safe. And this has obviously been a complete disaster for our class. The axe fell particularly heavily on, disabled people, the slashes to benefits. Fell very hard on women actually, who are forced to take up the burden of the burden of care, elderly patients. So I think when we're looking at the train that we're on, obviously those of us in those of you in the public sector workforce have now faced over a decade of basically wage freezes, pay freezes, below inflation pay rising, meaning that in most places, most public sector jobs, the wages are worth 25% less than they were a decade ago at the outset of austerity. We see the persistence of working poverty, a housing crisis. The kind of symbol of Tory Britain became the food bank, didn't it? And this, the kind of poverty that's become normalised in our society. They were very rare before austerity. Now there's more food banks than cinemas in Britain. There's more food banks than hospitals. There's more food banks than libraries, than McDonald's. So this is becoming, this kind of persistent poverty. The UN, when it did its report on Britain, he accused the UK government of the systematic immiseration of millions of people, that's what's been pursued. So I think we have to say that the Tory party in the last 14 years has left Britain broken in that way. It's left us poorer. It's left us more unhealthy. It's left our children, the children experiencing less growth, and developmental concerns because of malnutrition, because of the way this basically this period has had an impact on every part of Britain, but even down to the bodies of working class people. It's had an impact to that extent, and I think we should be furious about this. And millions of people are voting for change. We need to see that change. This is the same period, by the way, that saw the explosion of wealth at the top of society. The richest 1,000 people in Britain seeing their wealth increase by hundreds of billions of pounds between 2009 and 2013. And austerity is still going, right? Despite the kind of, it's been declared dead. The austerity period is over. It's been declared over for a long time. It's not over. It shapes our reality. It shapes the experience of working class life in this country. We're still seeing emergencies happening now. Councils going bankrupt. Birmingham, the biggest council in Europe, I think, the biggest local authority in Europe, had its budgets completely slashed in the last period. They're closing half their libraries. Their arts funding is going down to nothing. So the kind of demands that we're making, we need to bail out these things. These things are very important. Closing the last remaining kind of youth centres in Birmingham, they're just going to have to go, and this is happening now. So this is still very much on the cards. So there's been an attack, basically a systematic attack on our class for 14 years, and that's kind of the situation that we're in. So I think it's right to celebrate the backs of the Tories going. I think it will lift people's sights to see Liz Truss, Jacob Rees-Mogg, etc. With their hands, face in their hands, being booted out of Parliament. I think we should be very, very happy to see that. Obviously, I wish I could say I was happy and excited about the prospect of a Labour government, and I think I'm not the only one. There's actually very little enthusiasm for what Labour is promising. They're promising very little. And really, their record in opposition has been shameful on a whole number of ways, and we don't, there's not much hope to expect it's going to change very much. Not only in what little they're promising in terms of concrete improvement to working class people's lives, but any kind of recognition of the kind of great crises that are playing out in working class communities, and deepening it and destroying actually working class people's lives, the state of our services, etc. So we have to say, really, to Labour, there is an emergency going on in our communities, an emergency, and Labour have no answer to this, except that they're making very few promises, except we need to create growth. That's what they keep saying. Well, any increase in spending has to be linked to growth. But really, they have no plan for creating that growth either. If people saw Rachel Reeves' Myers lecture earlier this year, this is kind of like a lecture of the kind of bigwigs and the Economist, the Bank of England talk about their plans. This is what Nigel Lawson, who was Thatcher's Chancellor, set out his plan for austerity, etc. And in this, she kind of promises growth, removing the barriers to stopping more investment, vague promises made to improve education, etc. They scrapped the spending promises that they had. And obviously the economic picture in Britain is incredibly grim. The UK government is very much on life support. It's had falling productivity, falling business investment for a very long time. And the idea that that the Labour Party has any plan to reverse this is kind of laughable. The leading economists, when they were looking at Rachel Reeves' plan, identifying the problem very well. There's very low growth, but having no clear plan to turn that around, and actually really kind of continuing to pursue the kind of neoliberal agenda that's been set out by Nigel Lawson and followed through by other chancellors. So, she talks about, she has this concept of securonomics, which is very much about this awareness that there is we are entering a period that is more and more, gripped by crises in a number of ways, economic crisis, climate crisis, etc. But then, in the next breath, talking about she's, watered down the climate commitment, she's watered down the investment in other ways. So this great talk of insecurity has no kind of real grand scheme to turn these things around. There's no plan to borrow and spend to spur productivity or increase competitiveness. It's absolutely reliant upon a set of circumstances. Basically, the whole plan is waiting for an economic miracle that they have no plan to deliver, and actually plan to continue the neoliberal policies that got us into this mess to begin with. And, you know, for all their talk of kind of partnerships with the unions, partnerships with the Bank of England, they're going to have to choose a side. Are they going to invest into working class communities, or are they going to continue to work with the bankers? And I think it's very clear which side they will turn. And it's not just obviously the appalling economic plans that the Labour Party have, but they're actually appalling politics in a whole number of questions. And I think this has really spurred some of the anger that we've seen against the Labour Party. You know, appalling attacks on trans people, rolling back on commitments on the climate, complete capitulation and mirroring the Tory right on racist attacks on refugees and migrants. And perhaps worst of all, obviously, which I think has spurred, you know, the biggest kind of opening to challenge the absolutely shameful position that the Labour Party has taken towards the genocide that's going on in Gaza. You know, Keir Starmer saying that Israel had the right to withhold food, water, electricity to 2 million people. He said they had that right, and I think that shameful position should chase and haunt them for many years to come. I think in terms of what they've done. So I think from all of this, you know, from the economic questions through to the political questions I've gone through, I think Starmer has made it very clear in opposition whose side he is on, and it's not our side. And I think we have to be quite clear about that. If you're a migrant, a refugee, a single mum on benefits, a health worker, a trans person, someone who's been a victim of police violence, a social worker, a Palestinian campaigner, the Labour Party is not on your side. And I think we have to be clear about that. You know, despite what we might hear from some governments some unions actually, that this is kind of our government. If you see what, you know, for instance, Christina McAnee in Unison has put out following the election results. We have Rachel Reeves courting banking and big business, West Streeting, narrowly keeping her seat, well done to Liam Hubbard, but, you know, advocating for more privatisation in the NHS. You know, there's every indication that this government will continue to rule in the interests of big business and, of course, be a servant of US and British imperialism. You know, I was in Sean's meeting earlier where Keir Starmer was having, you know, he showed a video of Keir Starmer having his first phone call with Joe Biden, where he's talking about, you know, we continue to work together on a variety of imperialist adventures that they are pursuing. So, what's our attitude to this changing government? And I think this discussion's timely, and I hope that, you know, people involved in their unions will chip in. So how do we actually try and win real change at the moment, right? Not just cheap slogans of change behind a Union Jack. How do we actually fight for change? And I think that's the key question. You know, what is the role of socialists within our unions and our campaigns at the moment to change, you know, to this changing government? And I think, you know, we have to be clear-eyed about who they are. That's very clear. It's not a secret. They're telling us very clearly whose side they're on. They're not on our side, and therefore we have to be quite upfront about taking them on. Working class people can't wait, the NHS can't wait, the education system can't wait, the climate can't wait, Birmingham can't wait, all these crises, we have to be prepared to fight on them now. And I think, you know, we have to fight against any illusions that Labour will deliver this change, and we have to give them time. And we have to be quite clear about this. And I think we know for those of us in the unions, this will not necessarily be easy. You know, when we had, you know, a similar meeting like this at Marxism last year, we were in the midst of, or actually, you know, with hindsight, kind of on the tail end of, you know, the biggest kind of explosion in strikes in recent history for at least 30 years. You know, hundreds of thousands of workers out on strike for the first time in a generation. And we were talking in that meeting very much about the kind of limiting role that the trade union leaders were placing within the struggles themselves. You know, the kind of the strategy that was being pursued of kind of one or 2 days of strikes with kind of big gaps in between. You know, calling off strikes to kind of get members to vote on a deal that was very much below the demands of those members, and, you know, how that was playing a limiting role in the movement that had started with this kind of vast amount of energy, militancy, and like growing class confidence that we're very excited about all of that, and I think we're right to be. And despite the energy, all of that energy that we saw, the hundreds of thousands of people taken to the picket lines, all of those strikes settled for less than inflation. So for pay cuts, even if they were smaller pay cuts than what was originally set out, so striking made a difference. The level of struggle didn't reach to a pitch where the Tories had to start taking money off their rich friends and start to give it to us. It was never allowed to reach that pitch. And I think so. The Conservative role played by the trade union leaders in that period made it difficult to get the kind of action that we think was required to really take on the Tories. So there's, there was difficulties getting a fight even against a Tory government, which apparently they're all, so strongly against. So we can expect, I think, some level of resistance to taking the fight to Labour, because there are, historic links between the trade union leaders and the Labour Party. Ever since the Labour Party was set up from the TUC in 1900, and lots of unions today maintain very close ties with the Labour Party in all kinds of ways. So historically, there's been resistance to trade union leaders fighting against the Labour government, but I think this is not set in stone, and I think we're actually, what's been shown through from Palestine to the huge vote for the independence and the vote against Labour to the left in all kinds of ways, that we have probably more forces on our side than we thought going into this election, and I think that will be key for us. And actually, if we look to the big strikes and struggles in British history, there have been big strikes against the Labour government. It's not set in stone that there won't be. If we look back to the 60s under Labour Wilson government, there was actually a rising tide of militancy, with strike days, growing every year during that government. They were striking against, the government's attempts to make the working class pay for the kind of crisis that was developing in British capitalism. The economy was slowing down after the long boom in the post-war period. And there were attempts, very much, lots of attempts by the union leaders to enforce loyalty to the Wilson government, to not make too much of a fuss. But we were coming off the period of the 50s and 60s were periods of growing workers' confidence, where actually 95% of the strikes that took place were unofficial strikes. You didn't have to go through the bureaucratic method of ballots, etc. Is very much relied on kind of strong shop floor organisation. This is a period that Tony Cliff describes as do-it-yourself reformism, where the Labour government, because of the kind of growing, the economy was growing in that period. The workers, when they got organised on the shop floor, were actually winning big gains in that time. It didn't very much look to a Labour government to deliver on wages. They very much relied on that kind of strength. So workers were able to win, sometimes quite big concessions over pay in this time of economic growth. But once the economic crisis sets in, there's very much an attempt to try and make the workers pay. And even in more recent history, obviously, we have had a Labour government since Wilson, even under Blair, when I think there was a much bigger belief amongst the general population that Labour were going to deliver. I was having a discussion with people in the bar last night. This isn't like 1997. The wool is very much off people's eyes very early into the piece. There was a growing restlessness, even under Blair, as Labour weren't really delivering for people. There was a kind of growing we had the firefighter strikes in 2002, and then of course the big explosion around the Iraq War, and growing levels of anger. So I think it's hard for us, to predict the extent to which trade union leaders will try and enforce loyalty to Starmer. It's difficult to predict that. There'll definitely be arguments and attempts to stop our strikes, but we know that happens, as I said, under a Tory government anyway. And I think our ability to overcome that will be very much down to our level of organisation of that, that growing, the forces that are angry at Labour and want to fight now. And I think there's reasons to be optimistic about that, actually, signs to be positive. We're not the only ones who have very little faith in Labour, as I've talked about. The last 2 to 3 years have seen, not only the biggest social movement in British history with Palestine, but also seeing the biggest level of strikes for 30 years. So we have, experience in the class of, taking part in big demonstrations and taking part in strikes as well. There's recent experience of mass struggles. And even if we, look to that side, there's even within the people who took strike action, we even identified, there was people who voted against the deals that were put by the trade union leaders, which we attempted to organise within, an initiative we took last year called the Workers' Summit, where we were attempting to bring together those who wanted to keep fighting, not take the first offers that would come. So we identified that group of people, and even within that, there's a minority of workers within the class who want to get organised, who see that you can't always trust the trade union leaders to lead the kind of fight that you see. So we start to see the development of networks that bring together workers and strikers in different unions. Of course, there's NHS Workers Say No, which Jordan and others take part in, which led the campaign to vote against the deal in the RCN and in other places. Attempting to get action on within the health service, cut across different unions, etc. We see, networks of workers and strikers in unions who try to get the workers' action back on. We see, this developing in other ways. UCL Solidarity movement, which has attempted to bring together the people who, are organising independently of the bureaucracy, trying to organise solidarity, especially with, universities are facing, huge cuts and redundancies, and attempting to build that solidarity and try and get national action back on. Within schools, we have Educators Say No, or Educators Say Light the Fires, which again is Educators Say ... Again, a network that's set up to be independent of bureaucracy at key points, to lead a fight against attempts to stop the action, and is now attempting to light the fires, try and get action in as many workplaces as possible. So I think there's reason to be hopeful that we have forces on our side, and I think the election, if anything, shows us we have much bigger forces than we thought we did. So I think as I said, our ability to get the kind of action on that can really challenge the ruling class will be the level to which we can organise that side within the unions and actually across the unions. We should talk about that. So really, we want to see more of this, I think, and we should keep in our mind really the kind of our goals around building these kind of we call them embryonic rank and file networks. Workers who at least see the need to organise independently of the trade union leaders. They're not at the height of the rank and file organisation that we saw, for instance, in the 60s and 70s. But it's an attempt to try and challenge the union leaders. And I think the rank and file traditions that we've seen through British working class history, we should continue to look towards and argue within these networks that we want to be able to not only challenge the union leaders, we want to be able to put on action independently of them, and that's kind of that's the kind of goal that we should keep in our mind. So these are the kind of organisations and the kind of confidence we want to see today, and that's kind of our strategy. We want to continue to build these networks and kind of argue for a militant strategy to take on the government on NHS pay, on council funding, and all of these questions that are really, just vital in terms of transforming, working class communities in the way that we talked about. And I think we should be confident there are big possibilities to ignite these struggles in the workplace and then turn them into national confrontations. I think that should be our hope, and we look to build the combativity and solidarity with every struggle to kind of rebuild that confidence and strength, because we want to get back to a working class that is combative, that's competent. And I think the role of socialists within moments like these, saying no, we can fight under a Labour government, is going to be vital. So just, I think we want to talk about politics as well. I've been talking very much about the kind of economic struggles, but I think this whole weekend, really, we've been discussing the multiple intersecting crises that increasingly dominate the world, basically, as the capitalist system goes more and more into crisis. From the genocide in Gaza, rising imperialist tension and competition, climate breakdown, the rise of the far right. I think for those of us in unions and workplaces at this time, the answer is not just to be the most militant trade unionist, although you should attempt to be the most militant trade unionist, fighting over bread and butter issues, as they call it. But this is a period where I think that the questions of economics and questions of politics are being increasingly intertwined, and we have to be arguing that capitalism is in a persistent economic malaise. We're seeing a deep economic crisis going back to the 70s. Capitalism is destroying the planet. It's leading to perhaps, more and more dangerous wars happening. We've seen, Ukraine. We've seen what's happening in the Middle East, and of course, we should see the talk from both our ruling class, the ruling class in the US, and its attitude towards China in terms of where they see this as going. So our fight against armour is over the economic questions. We can't wait while our children are getting, shorter, our communities are in crisis. But they also completely capitulate to the right on political questions as well. And I think this is something we have to hammer them on. We need to challenge the right-wing ideas, not only in the Labour Party, but actually within the trade union movement that are going to increasingly emerge, I think in this period. We have to put ourselves at the forefront of fighting for pay, fighting for dignity in our communities, for fighting for the services and the material improvements to working class people's lives. But we also have to be at the forefront of the challenge towards racism, and this is going to be very, very important, I think. While I think a lot of us were enthused at the performance of the independents, I think the five Reform MPs as well should kind of send a shiver down our spines in terms of Farage's populism and his attempt to really drive racism into working class communities that have been left behind really in the neoliberal and austerity period. And I think we have to say that unions have to fight to pull those people into the struggle with us against the austerity, but also we have to put unions at the heart of exposing these people and exposing the poison that is at the heart of the far right movement. We have to be at the heart of the challenge towards racism, and I think in the next year that's going to be quite a key thing for us, is building stand up to racism in our unions, getting all those fights on. Because fascists, it's obviously the far right. Am I coming up to the end? Okay, cool. Fascists and the far right, of course, they target minorities to break up our cohesion, don't they? So we're blaming each other instead of leading a fight at the top. But really, fascists and the far right have us as trade unionists, really, as their key thing that they want to destroy. If you look at the fascist movement, they want to come for all expressions of working class life, from trade unions to socialists, and we have to come out against that. So very much we have to bring politics into the working class movement. The slogan of British jobs for British workers is not good enough at this period. We can't be turning against each other. We're in a picture where the global picture is towards the slide of, a slide towards the far right, from Le Pen to Trump to Maloney to Farage. And the growing popularity of racism should worry us all in terms of how deep it's gotten. So I think it's going to be quite key for us to be rebuilding stand up to racism within our unions, building for the 27th of July. I think we need to see union banner after union banner coming out against Tommy Robinson and saying fascists not welcome. I think that'll be quite important. Because this slogan around British jobs for British workers, or kind of don't worry about challenging racism. Unions just have to get on with delivering for working class people, and that racism stuff will just slide away. That's very dangerous when the far right is on the rise. If you see the picture of militant workers in the 70s who came out to support Enoch Powell, we don't want that happening in this country. We want workers to use their muscles to challenge the politics that don't fight us, fight for Palestine against racism and for the climate. And the arguments, the kind of subtle arguments of people saw McLynch saying, the left patronises working class people when they call them racist for pointing out that they don't have enough, when they're claiming they don't have enough resources in the community to deal with an influx of refugees or whatever. It's not about patronising working class people. We have to be very clear that this is a poison in our community and it has to be challenged. We can't make any concessions to it because it will only give ground to the far right to grow. And I think that's why it's so dangerous when Labour, echoes the far right on refugees and immigration. I think France is warning for all of us about when centrist politics concede to these arguments and then don't deliver for working class people, that people could be drawn to radically poisonous politics, and we have to fight We have to fight to make sure they're forced to give more of us at the top. And I think the experience that we've had, a number of people in this room, in kind of building for Palestine in the workplace and kind of challenging the energy, actually shows us that when we raise politics in the workplace, that's how we build the union and build the combativity in the union. Many people in this room have been involved, getting people down to part of the trade union bloc, building action at the workplace around this. And I think that's the kind of energy we want to be bringing to the challenge towards racism. But ultimately, I think for us, as socialists, has to be a bigger vision, and trying to win more people around us to a bigger vision for change than Labour can imagine. That has to be our goal, because we need to put an end, really, to the kind of politics that sees us hurtling towards crisis in a whole number of ways. And it's going to be working class people with socialists at the heart of it. They're going to have to fight to deliver that. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Neil. I'm in the National Education Union, and our schools are in a state now after the last 14 years. Our buildings are rotting. We don't have enough SEN, special educational needs teachers. We don't have enough mental health counsellors. The money hasn't been put in. And what Keir Starmer is going to try and tell us is that 6,500 new teachers is enough. That doesn't touch the size. That's one teacher for every 3 schools. He's going to tell us that there's no money to put into our schools, yet he's going to keep arming Israel, and he's probably going to keep sending weapons to Ukraine. So there's money for wars, but there's not money for education. So what do we do about that? Jess mentioned about building confidence. We had last year, our education strikes were kind of on the back of or joined in with the postal strikes and the rail strikes. It was quite kind of not easy, we had to work for it, but it was kind of easier to get members on side because it was on a wave of national action in different industries. This year it was a little bit more difficult in our indicative ballot. And when we next go on strike, and we absolutely should, against the Starmer government, because they're not going to give us the real change that we need. In that meantime, I think it's really important that we build confidence in our schools and workplaces, wherever it is you work, to strike where you can in your workplaces. Because what that does, it builds confidence amongst members that when we do have that national action, they think, oh look, we can win. An example of that in my school, last month, we took strike action against performance-related pay. So teachers weren't allowed to progress because of, reasons deemed by management not good enough, which didn't. They'd be working hard and they should go up. So we struck for 2 days. We threatened 7 more days of strike action. After the first 2 days, we got the concessions from the leadership of the school, and those teachers were allowed pay progression. And what that did, 98% of our union membership were on the picket lines on those 2 days. What that has built confidence amongst them now, and they were wavering a little bit in the last month or two over, striking again on pay nationally. But it's built confidence now. And if we all keep trying, it's not easy in every workplace and trying to find an issue, but there are issues there. If you can build that confidence among members now, whatever industry you're in, it bodes well for the near future on a national picture.
I really think that the biggest challenge that we face is to get the union leaders to go from those bread and butter demands to political demands. And I am from Austria. We are a country that generally strikes very little. And what we see is that the union leaders really refuse to take on political issues, even if political groups approach them. Like, for example, the climate movement would always approach union leaders. And even if a huge number in the working class is concerned with issues like racism and the climate movement, they will not do that. So the most emancipatory strike action that we had in the past years was actually from the delivery guy riders collectives, and it was, I think, over 1 year ago now, that they started to organize from the bottom up under the worst conditions. They didn't have union representation because they have very precarious working conditions, and the leading point behind the strike was actually that they were experiencing so much racism at the workplace that they started to organize bottom up and have those huge, very impressive strike actions. And I think that this is exactly what we need to build up, the pressure from below. Also, if it means to work outside of the union and build up the networks for ourselves, so that we can pressure the union leaders into political action.
I just wanted to talk about how there isn't this separation between the political and the trade union in terms of how you operate in your workplace. So at my school, we have done every action, the national actions that have been called by Stop the War, we have done something. Whether it's a lunch, whether it's a protest outside. On Thursday the 27th, we actually marched down our local street, because my school's in the middle of nowhere, and picked up a primary school on the way, and then stood on the main high road, which was brilliant, because then you're getting the beeps, you're getting the feedback, you're getting kids chanting, etc. But how we built it is also how we build the other things that we do at work, and that is by having a union meeting. Starting with a union meeting, straight after October the 7th, we had something solidarity with Palestinians. We've also had union meetings about the trans guidance, that we don't have to do it because it's guidance. We've had meetings about racism, so it's political. And then you have a bunch of activists, don't you? You have the people who've been doing the things at the lunchtimes or whatever, and they're the people who go around getting the ballot result out. So the indicative ballot at my school is one of the biggest union groups, and it got 95% that vote on the indicative ballot, and the only people that didn't vote were people who'd actually left the school. So we're now in a situation, aren't we, where the genocide is continuing, and in terms of the welfare state, there are only two things left standing. They are hospitals, so you can't get a GP's appointment, you go to the hospital. You can't get your mum or gran anywhere, they stay in a hospital bed. And there are schools. So you cannot get mental health support, you cannot get social workers, you can't get food. We've got food banks at my school. So you're in a situation where public sector workers particularly are absolutely against it. So when the election result came on Friday, last time, 97, I went in with a bottle of bubbly, made a hey for Patillo, and then did a Blair's gonna kick us in the teeth, let's fight. I had the bubbly in my car, and I wasn't feeling it. And I thought, if I'm not feeling it, no one else is feeling it. And actually when I went in, there is bitterness, very low expectation, and actually I think anything our trade union leaders do to fight, we will follow. Let's push them and make them do it.
Way back in 1975, I think it was, I was young, slim, had lots of hair, as I do today. But I always remember going to union meetings, and I remember I used to work for Camden Council. We used to have big union meetings, and there were these nutters there arguing to bust the paper strike that the Labour government were trying to make. I thought they were absolutely nutters. And there had to be SWP members, or forerunners to the IS, right? Because what the argument was in those days was that the Labour government had a minority in Parliament, and that we had to have pay restraint, we had to have pay cuts in order to keep the Labour government in power. That's what the trade union leaders were pushing in those days. And at the same time outside, inflation was running riot, poverty was increasing, and that led to what was called the winter of discontent, right? Which is not just a disillusionment with the Labour government, but it also ushered in a period of Thatcher, all right? So I do think it's important we do listen to those stories, because we can learn from the past, which will guide us in our action for today. Just something that I think might be useful. Over the last couple of years, I've been involved in my local trades council. My experience may not be the same as other comrades, all right, and I admit that, but I've been involved in my local trades council, which has been an absolute brilliant experience, because loads and loads of activists, trade unionists, we managed to get them to join the trade council. We get to hear about local disputes, and we build solidarity between the disputes in those local areas. Without going into any further stuff, I'd urge you to pop along to your local trades council and see if you can get involved in it.
We're in the middle of the biggest strike wave in recent memory in Hastings, a small town on the south coast, which is probably why you haven't heard of this strike wave. But it is I'm the district secretary of the NEU, the National Education Union, and this is the first trust-wide dispute in the country. We've got 5 schools out on strike. We had 2 days of strike last week. We've got 3 coming up this week. We've got 3 more schools balloting, and we've got more strike days announced for September. And we've had 200 on the picket lines in Hastings, most of whom are people on their first strike ever, and this is despite last year's pay dispute. And we've had a 50% increase in NEU membership since the dispute started. And what's really interesting about that is that most of the new members are from support staff because when they approached the GMB and Unison in their schools wanting to take part in the dispute, both unions said it's complicated, we can't ballot, and so they moved over to the NEU because that appetite for a fight is there. And I think, but alongside of that, you have to address the political arguments. I've had some really in-depth conversations with some of the TAs in my school. The TA that works with me, who's a 58-year-old royalist, on her first ever strike, her first ever picket line, which she was really nervous about doing, but then ended up hurling her placard into the middle of the road and absolutely loves pickets now. But one of the TAs was going to vote for Farage, was going to vote for reform because of disillusionment with Labour. So we've absolutely had to address the issue of the divisions coming from above, the anti-migrant racism, which on the South Coast is a really critical issue. And the arguments that we're not blaming the people in small boats, that it's the people in super yachts that to blame, that in order to have a united struggle, we absolutely have to challenge anti-migrant racism, transphobia. All those have been really central to building. And I think one of the significant things about Hastings is that the NEU was moribund until January 2023. It's been built by conscious political activity, and when I say political, I mean from the word go, not limiting it to bureaucratic trade union strategy, but by having public meetings, involving parents, involving the wider community, getting out on the street with stalls and leaflets, making the argument that this is about education for a deprived community on the South Coast that have been forgotten, and that's been really central. So activity, unity and challenging oppression.
Yeah, I'm in Unison, and so obviously have had a bizarre post-election thing when on the one hand, great to see the back of the Tories. My MP was Keir Starmer, well still is sadly Keir Starmer, but it was Keir Starmer, half of Keir Starmer in terms of his vote. And of course we've got a General Secretary who's posting on Twitter about at last we've got a government that's going to bring change for working class people. And so there's a huge gap, isn't there, between what the top of the union leaders say and what we need to do and what the reality is of how people feel. And I suppose I want to come in on the thing, because I'm in the meetings, from Patriots to Palestine, and actually it really matters that it's not an either-or scenario on this, to be honest. And I mean, certainly in our branch, we've had good experiences of both, to be honest. We had a strike in our branch last year, 59 days of indefinite strike action by a group of our members, and we went for, it was a conscious thing to go for indefinite strike action. We didn't stumble into it because, periodic strikes had failed. We went for that from the beginning, and that was because of a political argument that we had with the reps about that was the way to win, and then persuaded the reps that they had to have that political argument with members. But actually it worked because they won a £5,000 pay increase above the rate of inflation when inflation was at its peak last year, which was a huge, huge win for people to go on to. But also we've had some fantastic stuff over Palestine. So last week, 27th, the week Thursday ago, we've done something on every workplace day of action. On the 27th, we joined up with Google workers, because their building's next door to ours, and we called it a picnic for Palestine to make people who weren't confident feel more confident to come out. Bizarrely, some of those people actually bought picnic blankets for picnics. None of the activists bought any food, of course, whatsoever, just scavenging at the end. But we also got Andrew Feinstein, one of the local independent campaigners, to speak, and Jeremy Corbyn, and we got 150 people out, so about 100 from my workplace. I mean, we too, a few days after October the 7th, we had a union meeting and we talked about Palestine. That's all we talked about in it and what we were going to do. We've had members in the ban on every single national demonstration, nearly all the local ones as well. And we've got a whole new layer of members. We've had a highest recruitment since October, consistently, to the union branch. And we've got new reps from it, a number of them, Muslim women, actually, who've come forward to lead. And I think the branch is stronger because of that, because they are people who politically know how we're going to have to take on a Labour government because of what they're saying over Gaza And that means I think we're much better placed to fight industrially overpay as well.
Coming at the back, you mentioned the 1970s, and I started working in the pits in 1974, and I got involved going to union meetings, one of the first union meetings, also addressed the question of the social contract. And I remember people like Steve Hamill, Pete Beavers, who were with the Communist Party and with the IS arguing against that, and losing it. I remember my father arguing with people who were trade union activists to accept the social contract. Now, when you look at what's happening today, you know, this Labour government as it's come in. I mean, what's astonishing really? I went on a demonstration a few days after the Labour government getting elected, with 100,000 people demanding the end to the genocide. Now, that wouldn't have happened, right? There have been campaigns because people will have illusions that change can come through the ballot box, and there's a lot of people out there have got no, as we say, they voted Labour, but they've got no expectations or enthusiasm, and they know that there's a fight on his hand. And also, the question of Palestine, what I'm finding is how, I mean, my own family here, I mean, they're raging about Palestine, some of the younger members of my family, one of my sisters, and the connecting, it's the same system that is basically has forced austerity, that is expecting people to work for long hours for absolutely nothing. So there's everything to play for and fight for. That's if we're there on the ground doing that. And I think also, you know, going back to the 1970s, where, again, my political education, we're seeing the likes of the comrades get up and move moving motions, attacking the Nazis, fighting racism, you know, taking Nazis who were in our workplace. We had 2 Nazis, and there was a successful campaign that drove them out by the Anti-Nazi League, both outside and inside through his union branch. So we've got everything to fight for and play for, and I just want a quick plug for one thing that is an open door for us here. We've got no expectations from Labour, as we said, but there's one thing that Labour are promising, is that is an inquiry into Orgreave, what happened at Orgreave on the 18th of June 40 years ago. And I think that every comrade should get a motion through the branch demanding that that pledge is honoured and the open inquiry. That is straight away a discussion about the state, about the role of the police, about, you know, why we won't put up with this. And so that is a real gift for us, and I think we should really push on that.
Just a couple of thoughts from the Scottish college lecturer dispute. But before I say that, I'm sick of the bubble. It's definitely no bubbly. Maybe a bottle of Buckfast. And also the last couple of days we've done Farage. We've had 100,000 on the March for Gaza. So my phrase has been, we need to start the way we need to go on. So on the National College lectures dispute, I would like to say that we played our part in Scotland in what we're calling the SNP meltdown, because SNP been wiped out across the Central Belt. Because we're in I'm not going to go through it, we've had no pay rise since 2021, we've been in dispute for 2 years, I've been on strike like for the last month, before we're on holiday now by the way, for the last month. We've had 2 all-out strikes in the biggest colleges, we're getting members getting faced with a lockout and deeming for action short of strike action. We've been on national strike action in Scotland in colleges 9 out of the last 10 years, and we've beat them every time. But this is the angriest, most bitter dispute that I've been in. Thank God I went on holiday, but I'm looking forward to getting back in August once we beat the Tory anti-trade union legislation on the ballot threshold again. What I want to share is that dispute, really angry, really bitter. The comrade who spoke before, sorry, I should be exaggerating, but sometimes it's the first time in my life, I know I'm not making any great claims, but you really need to pay tribute to the fight of the miners. Sorry, when you're out and people know that in any bitter dispute. I'm not saying we're going to win, I don't know how it'll go, but we are fighting to the last. Since October, we have seen real significant presence in the movement for Gaza with your trade union, the EIS. It was one of the first trade unions I think in the country to put out a statement, and it wasn't bad. it was okay. We've had articles saying Palestine is a trade union issue, going through the arguments with all the members. We've had loads of members on all the demonstrations, not largely organised, but in the last June, where Stop the War in Scotland had a national demonstration. The EIS was one of the biggest presences, and I had the biggest ever number of members on any political demonstration I've had ever. And lastly, the links are real. We changed the chant, 1, we are the people. We changed it to 1, we are the union. 2, we won't be broken. 3, fair pay now. And it was the people that had been on the demos and then on the picket line, and also made homemade placards, modelled on the Stop the War placards. We've got everything to fight for and everything to win, so good luck, comrades.
Hi, I thought I would talk a bit about young trade unionists, because I think, I'm in Unison, I'm a student in Unison, and the average age of a member in Unison is kind of, I think it's in the 50s, and then the average age of an activist is even older again. And I think often trade union spaces can be spaces where young members aren't actively welcomed. It's kind of, if you have any ideas, they're shut down a lot. If you have any questions about how unions work, it's kind of a lot of impatience around that. And then if they do want young members to be involved, it will be the kind of, oh, why don't you become the young members officer? And then if you try and get involved in anything beyond being a young members officer, it's kind of, oh, stay in your lane and behave yourself as your members officer. And young people are so alienated from the trade union movement. They have a lot of sort of tokenistic quotas about how many young members you have to bring to certain events. But again, it's kind of, they will engage the young members for as long as they need them, but they don't want them to be engaged. So I think a lot of young members feel very isolated in the trade union movement. And I think also that there's a servicing model across a lot of trade unions, Unison especially. It's kind of the leadership often want you to pay your subs, get your dentist discount, and treat it like an insurance policy, and that just doesn't appeal to young people. Young people kind of, I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of a sense that you feel a bit more invincible the younger you are, but also it's kind of, you look at trade unions and the stuff that really appeals to you is the prospect of fighting back. Fighting against poor working conditions, fighting against burnout, and fighting for better public services, and not having that narrow vision around just your working conditions. So I think it's a really key spot to organise young trade unionists, because I feel so isolated from branch leadership. Since I joined the SWP very recently, but I find it sort of gives a voice not just to sort of me as a young person, but as a young person on the left being able to organise. I think there are a lot of young people feeling very isolated in the trade union movement, and we need to support them and empower them to speak out.
Yeah, Carmel, I'm in UCU. I want to make a couple of points. I think the discussion around strikes that are taking place on the ground in local areas are really important. But actually we have to find a mechanism to turn this into national action across the UK. Because I think the trade union leaders are very happy with small strikes, isolated strikes, that don't affect national bargaining. Because it doesn't put arguments to the government. When you put arguments for the national employers to have a pay award or whatever it comes to be, it starts putting political arguments about the funding of the sector, whichever sector you happen to be in. And I think it's really important that we start finding mechanisms to turn the local disputes and the local demands into national demands and force the national union leaders and bureaucracies to move. Because whether they say it or not, they are hoping that Starmer brings things, reforms for them. And they are acting to stifle strikes taking place. In my own union we're seeing this. And I'm sure that's the case in other unions. And I think part of what we have to do is, I don't know, as I said this already, we have to combine those strikes with political campaigns. We can't simply put demands for more strike action over pay, jobs, whatever it must be. We also therefore have to address the question of the politics of marketisation, whether it's in the NHS or in my sector like the universities. We have to actually put the argument, the reason why there's a crisis is because of the way in which the private sector has come into these different areas and marketisation takes place. So we can't avoid those political debates, but we again have to start doing that on a national level. We have to pull the left in our unions into these environments, whether it's on Palestine, whether it's on marketisation, into a political argument about how we change the sector. And I think it's fundamentally important, because otherwise the trade union leadership will only be too happy to see end of national bargaining and local strikes replacing national strikes. I'll leave it there, thanks.
Hiya, so I'm wearing a t-shirt. I'm from Barnet in Unison, Helen Davis, and we've got a strike. We've had 76 days of strike action from social workers now, and there have been a number of weeks of the Labour-controlled local authority using an agency to break the strike, which is unlawful. The National Union issued letters saying, and pre-action protocols saying basically you're criminals for doing that, which is strongly worded, I have to say. But that action has not been taken into the High Courts. So our strike is effectively neutralised because of that action of strike breaking going on. And the social workers involved in the strike are predominantly young workers, and they've been absolutely horrified. I mean, I have to say, put my hands up, naively, we thought this dispute will have a few days action, they'll cave or give us something, and that's it. Because the demand wasn't that much. And the employer has actually said to us, yeah, we can afford this, it's not a problem, it's cheap. It would be cheap to solve the dispute. So you have to ask yourself why. They're running a service whereby this is mental health social workers, so people's lives are at risk in the community, and the people who are supporting mental health. Why would you do that to your community? Why would you see now what we've got is a massive exodus of social workers? The strike will probably come to an end because of the numbers of social workers leaving. Why would you trash a service which is about saving lives? Well, I suppose, why would you support a genocide? These are the same politicians who support a genocide. So the social workers at the heart of this have been had a pretty brutal lesson. We've got a lobby of the council on Tuesday, 6 o'clock. Really, I do want everybody who lives in that area or can get people, send the word out, please try and mobilise on that, because we have to expose the rottenness of a Labour-controlled council which is totally in support of Starmer. And part of the experience of the social workers has been that, it's not an accident that two of them have been participating in Marxism, one has become a comrade, and we've had a little breakthrough, which is tiny for a lot of people, but for us is a big deal, because Zionism in Barnet is massive. It is a huge, huge question, what we bump up against. And we've been trying to get people to come together in the trade union block on the demo, and for the first time we've had a small group of us on that demo.
Yeah, so I want to come back on the comment at the back, because I'm not sure I agree with some of the formulations, and I'm not sure that we should put things quite in that way. You see, it's simply not the case that for trade union leaders they are happy to see the back of national bargaining. That doesn't make them happy. It's against their material interests not to have national bargaining, and I think that's just a fundamental truth. Does that mean that they'll fight? No, of course it doesn't. Does it mean that they'll fight adequately to maintain national bargaining or fight to get national bargaining? No, it doesn't. But I don't think we can throw around things that are not accurate. It is actually against their interests not to have it. And on the question of local disputes, I think it's more contradictory than that. Of course, whole sections of the leaderships of the unions want to use local disputes. They say it's about building capacity, building strength, building confidence. But of course, we know for them it is also about avoiding that national fight. Saying, actually, we're really combative, we're really going to give you as much strike action as you want on a local level, and off the hook, therefore, for national action. But we then can't just dismiss the local fights. We can't just dismiss getting the local fights, because at the moment, certainly in the MEU, there's an absolute open door for it. we'd be completely wrong if we didn't push at that open door in order to get as many local disputes and seek to coordinate them on local and national levels, because there is potential there to build confidence and combativity in order to come back on the national arguments inside the union and get that national action back on. So I think it's more contradictory than the comrade suggests, and I just think we have to think things through, just scratch a little bit below the surface of some of those arguments in order to develop more of a worked out strategy that builds combativity of rank and file workers, because you can't do that just simply by the attacks on the bureaucracy. You have to, there's a with and against, I haven't got really time to go into the with and against arguments, but we need to thrash that out, and I didn't think, sorry Conrad, that it was a very helpful contribution.
I wanted to dwell on the question of Palestine. We in the Socialist Workers' Party, you may have noticed this weekend, are quite fond of quoting the Russian revolutionary Lenin. And one of the things that Lenin talked about is the model for revolutionaries is not the trade union branch secretary, it's the tribune of the oppressed. And when you think about the extraordinary movement that we've been through, there are thousands upon thousands of people who have taken that approach going into their workplace. They've put the badges on, they might have worn the keffiyeh into their workplace, they've tested it, they've had arguments in work, they've seen what the pushback is from their workmates and from the bosses. Sometimes they've faced victimisation for doing some of those things. The unions have lagged behind on this question, no doubt about it. And it's true that the unions are pretty much universally dreadful on the question of Ukraine, but I also want to say that, actually they've lagged behind on the question of Palestine massively. It's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes they play catch-up. In Unison, for example, Christina McAnear went to Ramallah. She wasn't a human shield in Gaza, she went to Ramallah, okay? But good she went to Ramallah. That shows some of the pressure. This is in the last 2 months, by the way, people should understand. But she's not spoken on a single national demonstration and so on. It lags behind. You think about the TUC demonstrations over austerity. They put those big balloons, don't they? The AU's there with its big balloons, Unison, Unite, etc. Looks spectacular and so on. That's lacking, isn't it? And you've got all those union members on those demonstrations lacking a lead. The SWP has attempted over the last 9 months to fill some of that space, to take it up. We've been the backbone of the workplace walkouts. There are probably a lot more people in this country who'd like to have walked out of their workplace and held a protest outside of their workplace. We're not big enough to generate a big enough push. We need more people who have that approach inside of the workplace and inside of the unions. We think about it, we look at the high points of British struggle, Red Clydezides. It took place in the First World War, didn't it? It was the munitions factories where there was unofficial action and so on. There's a strong history of this, and it's not, someone said it's not good enough just to have good policy. RMT, FPU, they have good policy. What is it delivering on the ground in terms of action over some of these questions? And I agree with all the people who say that I think this can feed into other questions, and people like Helen at the front who described it very well. The last point is, how far does Tony Cliff in that book on the left-hand side there take this question of the problem of the trade union bureaucracy? He says, when in the West, and especially in Britain, where the trade union machine has existed and consolidated over decades, in all probability, the victory of socialist revolution will precede the destruction of the trade union bureaucracy. That's how much emphasis Tony Cliff puts on that question. That's a task for us all as we come into this Labour government and the bureaucracy that leans and looks towards that Labour government.
Okay, thanks. I think it's useful. It's good that we're having discussion and debate, because I think we're in a new situation where we're going to have to be I think thrashing out the strategy quite seriously, and I think all the debates we've had over the weekend will be very useful to going into that. I think obviously the question of the economic the question of the economic and the political, and us very much needing to fight on both of those things and trying to bring them together. Because I think we're trying with the period that we've just I went into a bit of depth around the what austerity has done to working class communities and the kind of harm that's been done, and really this kind of period really kind of period of, not a low level of struggle against it really, in some apart from some, strikes at the beginning of it, but really, a period of defeat. And I think what is positive, I think, is that there are signs that our side is kind of growing in confidence to kind of fight back and not just accept this. Of course, we've had the strikes, we've had the people who want to get organised beyond that, and above all, we've seen these mass movements against around political questions. And I think what the comrade at the front was talking around getting kind of new young fighting people into the trade union movement. It will very much be often around the question of politics that I feel most confident in it, and I think that's quite a key in kind of not only building the confidence of our side, but also taking forward a fight that brings all those people with us. Because actually, despite austerity and low wages is something that affects us all very deeply. Oftentimes people feel more confident, coming out around the political questions and doing what we can to kind of trying to make the links between those things. And that's why it's so important that we're trying to go forward in a way of trying to increase struggle, very much increase struggle under Labour. That's what we want, don't we? We want more strikes under Labour. And I think we're in a good position to get them if we continue to build on both of these tracks. I want to around the debate around national versus local action. I think it's clear we're very much in favour of national action. We want to get a national campaign against the Labour government around the question of education, around the question of council cuts, around all of these things, around funding universities. I think we should be very clear about that. But I think we should be trying to, if we can't get national action, we should be trying to get struggle. We should be trying to increase the level of struggle wherever we can. And I think that's quite important. And within local struggles, it's not the kind of confrontation against the government that you need. But socialists play a role, don't they? Or they should be trying to play a role in trying to drawing out the political debates that are going on. Jenny, you spoke very well about the arguments you're having around racism, but also about if there's cuts going on, it's very much you're not just taking on your local authority or whatever. This is about a bigger picture of where we see the future going. And I think within every strike, you start to have those conversations, don't you? I thought Samara, who spoke in the opening rally, talking about how taking on her school has actually opened up all these questions about on the picket lines around what is the kind of education that we want, what successive governments have done in schools. So I don't think we should counterpose them, but I do think we want to play a role whenever there are local strikes in fighting to coordinate any local action that's going on. We want to deepen any solidarity work that's going on. We want to try and get people who are on strike going to speak to other workers and talk about the opportunities around that, and attempting to bring those workers together. I think that'll be quite important. And I think we're in a position to be kind of we do have a Labour government. We want to be getting action as much as we can. There is there'll be big sections of the trade union movement that want to make demands on this new Labour government. And I think that's right. I mean, it's not exactly, despite the talk of, they're just red Tories or whatever. They are slightly different. I know they're not promising very much, but they have promised, for instance, to get rid of the anti-union laws of 2016, which I think we should be holding their feet to the fire, because if they do that, that would open up a lot of possibilities for us, and we shouldn't really forget that, I think. So we want to be drawing as many people around us to increase the pressure and struggle against this Labour government around these questions, make demands on the government, draw people around us within each individual union, but I think across the unions as well. There is a sense within which working class communities have been experiencing a crisis for a very long time. What are the ways that we can try and cohere the kind of people who want to fight within the unions, but what does that look like across the unions as well? And I think that's a discussion that's going to develop, especially in light of how well the left really did at the election. And just to come to the question of racism, because I think it's a worry, isn't it? As I said, we're experiencing, coming out, hopefully, this period of like lots of defeats for the working class, lowering living standards, etc. There is a real danger if we just let Labour off the hook in any kind of way around owning up to these crises and what's going on. If there's the strength of the far right is at least they are saying that your life is getting worse, and there's a reason for that. And we know they're channeling it in the wrong direction into this bigotry, etc. But it can become an argument. People don't have housing, they don't have whatever. So I think we do need to be quite serious about challenging that, because we don't only need to challenge the racism that's at the heart of it, but we need to draw people into a project that says we do need to fight for change, but we're the ones who are going to deliver it. We can't look to the Labour Party in that. So I think, just to finish, because I think we're supposed to be out of here, I think, as I said, I think there's reasons to be, lots of reasons for us to be optimistic that we can lead struggles at the moment in all kinds of ways against the continuation of austerity, hold for the feet to fire, and of course the political questions against the far right. I think we have to think quite seriously in each of our kind of unions about what are the forces that are prepared, who can we work with to try and raise demands against the Labour Party, but who can we work with who actually says, we want to fight now, let's get the strikes on now. It's fantastic that we saw, the junior doctors striking in the run-up to the election, because it put Wes Streeting under pressure every day to talk about what he's going to do about health worker pay, and I think, there is dangers as well, isn't there? Obviously, if we leave things to the trade union leaders. One of the things I was most excited about was the prospect of a national strike in steel, like 2 days in the next week after the election. And I think that's one of the pitfalls of looking to, trusting in the trade union leaders. Sharon Graham, tells us she has no illusions in the Labour Party. I'm coming to an end now, I promise. No illusions in the Labour Party, but the decimation really of this, the last kind of steel producing bit is it will be a complete tragedy for those communities, and we've talked about what that means. It's such a shame that we didn't see the Unite continuing to lead the fight and going into talks. That they got those talks because of the pressure of an all-out strike. Imagine the kind of concessions they could have got if they actually went into an all-out strike. So I think that's the kind of we want to be constantly trying to work within the union. So we can't have any illusions in the Labour Party, and actually the trade union leaders, to a greater or lesser degree, do have some illusions in the Labour Party. We're going to have to look to build within our unions, within our communities, in a very outward-looking way to win the kind of change. So I'm actually quite optimistic that we have big forces on our side for which to do that. So I'll leave it there.